Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you've all had a good week. So today, I don't even know where to start. Be prepared to be so frustrated in today's case. This case makes my blood boil. Today we are going to be talking about the case of Sabrina Cuida. And today's case is another absolutely unbelievable case. It's another British one. It's one of the British ones that I said, I can't believe more people don't know about this. And it's just a case that is going to leave you incredibly frustrated. So Sabrina was a wannabe celebrity. She wanted to live that kind of lifestyle. She wanted to have a lot of money. She wanted to have celebrity friends, like running those circles.
When we take picture, it's very important to be very comfortable.
She was very entitled, but she was very delusional, and delusional is an understatement. She moved to London to chase this high fashion lifestyle, to try and be this celebrity. And for a short period of time, she actually got what she wanted. She had a celebrity boyfriend and she was able to live this celebrity lifestyle. But because she is a terrible person and she is very delusional, very paranoid, she was also incredibly obsessive, and she started to lash out. When she didn't get her own way, she started to lash out and take it out on those around her. And unfortunately, this case ends in complete tragedy. This case is very horrific and sadistic as well. It's definitely one of the more sadistic murders that have come from the UK. And it's another one as well that, because it's so sadistic, I don't understand how more people don't know about it. So I do have to give a warning for today's case. It's not going to be an easy case to listen to, so just prepare yourself for today's case. But before we do get on to today's case, I do have a special announcement. Now, if you've seen my community post, you'll already know about this. But if you haven't seen my community post, I'm very excited, very nervous as well. But we now have a podcast. And this is something that has been so highly requested. Pretty much every single video that I put out, I see so many comments saying, where's the podcast? We want a podcast. I really wish these videos were in podcast form. Well, now they are. And I've been dying to tell you about this because I've known about this for a while and I've been working on it behind the scenes, and the time is finally here. We have a podcast, The Criminal Makeup. So the podcast is going to be a mixture of my YouTube videos in podcast form, but I'm also going to be recording podcast exclusive episodes. So that is cases that haven't been seen on my YouTube channel. They're going to be podcast exclusives, and the podcast is already out. You can go listen to it right now. Go search for The Criminal Makeup on wherever you listen to podcasts, because it is out everywhere. And there are already 3 episodes up, and they are 3 of my favorite. The 3 that I've picked, I won't tell you which ones. You're gonna have to go and look. The 3 that I picked, I feel like were a good representation of my channel, and something that is very exciting. For every single episode, I am re-recording intros and outros, so I'm going to be there with you every single week. And for the outros on all of the cases that I've already covered on my YouTube channel, I'm going to be letting you know if there's any case updates. I'm going to be reflecting on the case, going through some of the top comments on the YouTube video. And I know that so many of you like to rewatch my videos because you like to listen to the case again. And by recording new intros and outros, I thought that that would be a really fun way for us all to re-listen to these cases. And then some weeks I will just randomly pop up with a podcast exclusive brand new episode, never before heard, on my YouTube channel. Now, disclaimer here, I don't know how many podcast exclusive episodes I'm going to be able to do. I am already flat out with researching for my YouTube videos, and my YouTube is always going to be my main priority, but I will do podcast exclusive episodes as often as I can. I don't really have a schedule for how many I'll do, like none of that. I will just do as many as I can. But the first podcast exclusive episode is actually going to be released this Thursday. I had to bring you on at the very beginning, didn't I? So yes, definitely check out the Criminal Makeup podcast. New episodes coming every Thursday, and you can listen to the podcast on Spotify, Apple, pretty much anywhere that you can get your podcasts. The Criminal Makeup podcast is there. I just want to quickly explain the name of the podcast. I mean, I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory, but just in case it's not. So when I was coming up with names of the podcast, like I pretty much hated everything. I was so fussy. And then when I was doing some research for a case that hasn't come out yet, I was reading this article and it was talking about the genetic makeup of this person. And when I read that, the genetic makeup, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, oh my God. that is my podcast, because I was thinking that's what I do. I talk about the makeup of a person, what makes them who they are, their background, their childhood, their relationships, any head injuries or anything like that. I talk about what makes a criminal, and that is how I came up with the criminal makeup. And then I just thought that that was really cute that I still had makeup in the title, just as a little nod that I do makeup over on YouTube. So yeah, I thought it was really clever. I don't know. Some of you may think it's such a stupid name, but I really like the name. And I don't even know if it needed that really long explanation, but there we go, we got one. And I would really appreciate it if you guys went over and checked out the podcast. And if you want to, no pressure, but if you would leave me a review over on the podcast on whatever platform you want, that would really help me out. That would help out the podcast more than you can imagine. And I just want to thank you guys so much. Like, I feel like I'm going to get a bit emotional. I just want to thank you all so much, because without all of you, I wouldn't be able to do things like this, and it truly means the world. Whew, trying to hold this in. You guys don't realize how much your support means to me, and just the fact that you guys show up every Sunday and watch my videos, it means more than you know. I'm going to shut up now because I really will burst into tears. So yeah, podcast is out right now, and yeah, I would really appreciate any of your support on the podcast. So yeah, anyway, let's just jump into this case. So Sabrina Cuida was born on the 5th of December 1982, making her a Sagittarius. And Sabrina was born in Algeria, but her family moved to France because they were fleeing a civil war when Sabrina was 8 years old. And Sabrina spent most of her childhood growing up in Paris. And unfortunately, not much is known about Sabrina's childhood, which is incredibly frustrating, because this is definitely one of those cases where I wish I knew more information. All we know is that Sabrina was the eldest of 4 siblings. Her family did struggle financially, and we do know that she had a pretty tough upbringing, which is no surprise, is it? I mean, she's fled a civil war in her home country. Obviously, that is going to have a huge effect on her. And Sabrina, when she was a teenager, her behavior has been described as volatile. When she was a teenager, this is apparently when her troubling behavior, her troubling side started to come to light. People have just described Sabrina as very difficult. If she didn't get her own way, she would kick and scream and make a scene. And she loved attention, which really does not surprise me, because she was the same as an adult. And she was very, very aggressive, especially towards other girls that she would see as her rivals, which obviously they're not, but that is how she saw them. So if a random girl on the street that she didn't know, so they were a stranger, if she thought that that girl was giving her a dirty look or what everything, she would physically attack this girl. And it's said that she specifically targeted people that were weaker than her, which is just classic bully, isn't it? She is a bully. It's funny, isn't it, how most of the time in these videos I talk about people's school life and how they are bullied, but Sabrina is the bully. She wanted people to know that she was in charge. Do not mess with her, because she will hurt you. And in her teenage years, Sabrina did start to have some trouble with drugs. She did become addicted to prescription drugs. She was also smoking marijuana as well. And one time there was an incident where she actually took an overdose of sleeping pills. Now, I don't know if this was on purpose. I really don't know, but apparently she did this to escape bad memories as a child. And it's reported that on her 18th birthday, Sabrina jumped from a 4th floor balcony. Again, I don't know what her intentions were behind this jump. I mean, I feel like maybe we can all assume what her intentions are, but obviously we don't know. But she did survive this jump, but she had severe back injuries. I mean, of course she did. I mean, just to put things into perspective, she broke both of her hands. I think she broke her wrist. She broke her hip, her leg, and her back. So yeah, significant injuries. And from this moment on, she was abusing prescription drugs even more because she was in a lot of pain. And apart from that, not much else is known about Sabrina's childhood. I mean, obviously they are very serious things, but we don't really know the reasoning behind some of those things. But I think we can all assume that she had a pretty difficult childhood. I mean, like I said, her fleeing from a civil war is not going to be easy for anyone. And then later on down the line, Sabrina has also claimed that she did suffer abuse, and some of that abuse was sexual, and she has actually accused 2 of her uncles of rape. I don't know anything more than that, and I never ever want to accuse anyone of lying about things like that. But we have to take what Sabrina says with a grain of salt, because she accuses people of certain things later on in the case that are just not true. She's definitely not a reliable source, so she has made those accusations and we don't know if they're true. They may be or they might not be. So Sabrina is now 19 years old and she's currently working in Paris, and she is like on a pancake stand. I know they're not called pancakes in France, okay, but I'm not even gonna try and pronounce crepe. Is it crepe? I don't know. I'm really bad at French. And this is when she meets a man, Wissem Madouni, and he goes by the name Sam, and he is a very significant person in this case. Now, at this point, when they met, Sam was 24 years old and he's currently studying for his master's degree. And it is said that he instantly fell for Sabrina. He instantly became infatuated with her. They very quickly entered into a pretty serious relationship. But to no surprise to any of us, a relationship with Sabrina is not exactly a healthy relationship. Sabrina was manipulative, she was a narcissist, she was controlling and very unpredictable. It's said that she would use her looks to her advantage to get what she wanted, and this is exactly what she did with Sam, and she could also be very violent towards Sam as well, so she is abusive. But because she was so manipulative, she had Sam wrapped around her little finger. Now, initially, their relationship, even though it was serious very quickly, it actually wouldn't last for too long. And that is because not long after their relationship started, Sam caught Sabrina cheating on him with one of his good friends. That just tells you everything right there, doesn't it? So you would think Sam would be, oh, because I've caught her cheating with one of my good friends, like this relationship is over, done, dead and buried. Sabrina managed to manipulate Sam into taking her back. And because Sam was so obsessed with her, he just couldn't say no. So Sam took Sabrina back after cheating, but then not long after, she cheated again. And it just became a pattern. Sabrina was a serial cheater. She would cheat on Sam, they would break up, then Sabrina would manipulate Sam into taking her back. Sam, because he was obsessed, would take Sabrina back, and then, I don't know, she was maybe loyal for a week, maybe two max. She would cheat again, they'd break up, and it was just this pattern. Sabrina would cry and turn on the charm and actually convince Sam that she was the victim in all of this. She would actually make Sam feel sorry for her, even though she's the one that's cheated, and then Sam would take her back. And this went on for years, constant manipulation. They would constantly be on and off because Sabrina would cheat on him or go off with another man. And in this time frame, she even got engaged and had a child with another man. But every time Sam would just take her back. It's literally crazy. So hopefully that paints a pretty good picture of what their relationship was like. Toxic, I think, is an understatement for their relationship. Sabrina was very abusive. She was. Let's not beat around the bush here. She was the dominant force in this dynamic. And that is definitely something to bear in mind for later on in the case. Not that Sam is innocent though, oh no, but Sam would just willingly participate in whatever Sabrina wanted. And ultimately, this dynamic would lead to the tragic events of today's case. But we have a lot more to get through before we actually get there. So we now get to the year 2004. Sabrina is currently 22 years old. She is currently in an off period with Sam. And Sabrina decides that she needs a fresh start. She needs something different in her life. So she packs up her things. She's currently living in Paris, remember, and she moves to London in the UK. Now, Sabrina moved to the UK because she dreamed of a better life. She actually dreamed of becoming a celebrity fashion designer, but to be honest, her real dream was just to be a celebrity. She wanted to be something to do with celebrities. She wanted to be a celebrity makeup artist at one point, a celebrity hairdresser, or a celebrity fashion designer.
The lady here on the left, she was the photographer and the makeup artist. Beautiful, beautiful lady from Paris.
When we take picture, it's very important to be very comfortable and be yourself. Just, that's it. Yeah.
She wanted to meet people in high places. She thought that she was destined to become a celebrity. But this is not something that happens overnight. She struggled to make this happen. So when she first got to London, she actually started working as a nanny, which is very significant in today's case. Definitely keep that in mind. Meanwhile, Sam, who's been left in Paris, he's just been abandoned. He doesn't know that Sabrina has moved to London, but when he does find out that she's moved to London, he packs up his things and he also moves to London to follow her, even though she doesn't want anything to do with him right now because he doesn't fit into her celebrity lifestyle. So Sam finds a job. He works at a bank and he basically just tries to convince Sabrina to take him back. And they end up getting back together temporarily. They do even get married, but the marriage wasn't legal. It was a religious marriage, so they didn't go through the legal process to actually be married in the UK, but they were technically married. They were very on and off, as always, and it was a very cat and mouse kind of relationship. And just because they now live in London, Sabrina is treating Sam the exact same. They would be together, she would cheat, they would break up, she would convince Sam to take her back, and he would. But Sam was the only person really in her life that was always there for her. No matter what she did, he was always there, and she knew that. So Sam was like her security blanket. She didn't really want Sam, but whenever she needed him or whenever she didn't want to be alone, she would phone him. And then somehow, amazingly, I don't know how this happened. Like, I don't know how the chances of this actually happening, but Sabrina got everything that she wanted. She actually found her way into the celebrity world because she leaves her relationship with Sam and enters into a new relationship with a celebrity, a pop star, Mark Walton. And you might be thinking right now, who the hell is Mark Walton? Because to be honest, when I started researching this case, I had that question. So let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? So Boyzone. How many of you know who Boyzone are? Well, it turns out that Mark Walton was one of the founding members of Boyzone. Now, I'm not actually sure how well Boyzone are known around the world, but if you grew up in the UK or Ireland in the 90s, I know you know who Boyzone are.
No matter what they tell us, no matter what they
Boyzone were pretty big. They were a pretty big deal, weren't they? I mean, Ronan Keating. Yeah, they were one of the bigger boy bands in the UK, maybe even the world. Like I said, I don't know. They were like your typical boy band. They were everywhere, radio stations, magazine covers. They had quite a few #1 hits. I'm going to admit right now, they weren't really my cup of tea. I was too busy listening to Destiny's Child, but that's just me. But Mark Walton, it was actually his idea to form Boyzone, which is crazy. So when Mark was only 15 years old, he approached Louis Walsh. And I know most of you probably know who Louis Walsh is, X Factor judge and music manager to some of the biggest boy bands. So Mark Walton took his idea to Louis Walsh and Louis Walsh loved the idea. And that is how Boyzone were created. And the band got together, everything was going great. They were recording songs, touring the country. And then just as they were literally becoming a success, when they were literally on the verge of signing a huge record deal, Mark Walton left Boyzone. And it's not really known why he left Boyzone. I mean, Boyzone was literally his idea, so I don't know why he left. But it turns out that maybe it was the best decision for him because he actually became a very internationally successful music producer. He would go on to earn millions of pounds, euros, dollars, whatever you want to say, if not billions. He wrote and produced songs for Lady Gaga, J-Lo, Enrique Iglesias, One Direction. He's a big deal. And the list goes on. There are so many people that he's worked with. He even managed the boy band Blue. Again, I don't really know how big Blue were outside of the UK, but if you are from the UK, I know you know who Blue are. So yeah, there we go. That is a brief history of Mark Walton. Hopefully you have a better idea of who Mark Walton is now. He is very successful in the music industry and he's also very rich. So going back to the story, Mark bumped into Sabrina in just a bank and she instantly caught his eye, and Mark asks Sabrina out on a date. Sabrina finds out who Mark Walton was and she said yes, and she just left Sam, completely left him behind. Now, when Sabrina did meet Mark, he was the manager of Blue at that time. He ran in the circles of celebrities, of pop stars. He ran in the circles that Sabrina always wanted to be in. This is the life that she had always dreamed of. The two of them soon move in together into a flat in West London. Mark starts supporting Sabrina financially, and Sabrina basically is a socialite. That is basically her job. She's just going out, partying, having fun and being photographed with all of the right people, wearing all of the latest designer stuff. So for Sabrina, this has worked out perfectly. Everything is going great. But that wouldn't last for too long. After a few months into their relationship, Sabrina started to become really insecure about their relationship. Sabrina found that whenever she was out with Mark, it was Mark that was getting all of the attention, not her. And Sabrina didn't know how to handle this. In the beginning of the relationship, she was acting really sweet and charming and tried to ignore all of this. But things now were not going her way. She wasn't getting everything that she wanted. And she didn't like it at all, and her charming personality, which is obviously a facade, it's not real, started to slip. And Mark is exposed to the volatile side of Sabrina, and Mark is now entering into what he has said at a later date, the most turbulent relationship of his life. So initially it started with Sabrina arguing with Mark in public, throwing temper tantrums essentially when he wasn't showing her enough attention. She would just get really angry in public for no reason, and she would go crazy over the most trivial things. So Mark and Sabrina were out shopping on Oxford Street and she wanted something. Don't know what she wanted, but Mark refused to buy it for her. So she went crazy. She ran out of the shop and started shouting literally to everyone, Mr. Boyzone got no money. Sabrina, why don't you just buy it for yourself? If you really wanted it, buy it yourself. But that is what Sabrina was like. She was very entitled. She thought that Mark should literally shower her in diamonds. And being around Sabrina was just like walking on eggshells. No one knew when she was going to flip out or over what. So things for Mark are a little bit difficult right now. A little bit is probably an understatement, but they get so much worse, which is why I say a little bit. So remember that Sabrina does have a child. That child is currently 8 years old. And Mark makes the decision to hire a nanny, which again, very significant in this case. Now, the nanny starts helping out with childcare, helping out around the house. Then Sabrina suddenly gets extremely paranoid about the nanny. She was convinced that the nanny wanted to sleep with Mark. Now, it's not known why Sabrina thought this because there was no behavior, nothing that would suggest that the nanny thought this, wanted this, but she was convinced that the nanny was always flirting with Mark, always being a little bit inappropriate with Mark, and that the nanny was trying to steal Mark away from Sabrina. So Sabrina fired the nanny. So then Mark hired another nanny. And guess what? The same thing happened. Sabrina got really paranoid. She thought that the nanny wanted to sleep with Mark. She thought that the nanny wanted to steal Mark. So she fired the nanny. And this happened over and over again. Mark kept hiring new nannies and the same thing would happen. Sabrina would get paranoid, fire the nanny, another nanny would be hired, and etc. And none of this was true, by the way. None of the nannies wanted to sleep with Mark. Mark didn't want to sleep with any of the nannies. It was all just Sabrina's paranoia, and she was so paranoid that she would even place hidden cameras around the house, thinking she was going to catch Mark sleeping with one of the nannies, which of course she didn't. And then it escalated even further because Sabrina started to be physically violent with Mark. He would constantly be on the end of slaps and punches, pushes, shoves. She would throw household objects at him, heavy household objects at him. She would make him feel like he deserved it. He was in the wrong. He made her do those things. There was even one time where she literally punched him in the face when he was sleeping because he was snoring. Why did Mark stay with Sabrina? And he stayed because he loved her. But you've also got to realize how manipulative Sabrina is. She had Mark wrapped around her little finger, just like she had Sam wrapped around her little finger. She's a narcissist. She's a manipulator. She's an abuser. Sabrina would also make up all of these stories about abuse in her childhood, which is why when I was going through the childhood section, I did say that we don't always know what's true. She used to make up stories about abuse to Mark, to make Mark feel sorry for her and to make herself the victim in all of this. She made Mark feel like he couldn't leave her. He had to look after her. She wouldn't be able to cope without him. Now, Mark was scared of Sabrina. Let's not beat around the bush here. He said that he was scared of her, but he didn't think that she was capable of murder. He wasn't scared for his life, but he was scared of her. And in the end, Mark actually did break up with Sabrina. He just couldn't take it anymore, and he broke up with her and moved to LA, and he probably thought that that was the end of their relationship. That was the end of Sabrina. But he would be wrong. So after the breakup, what does Sabrina do? She goes running back to Sam, who was literally waiting for her with open arms. And things between Sabrina and Mark were not quite over yet because there was a little bit of a complication. I don't even know if you want to call it a complication, but Sabrina had fallen pregnant. Now, I don't know who the father was, and I don't think we know who the father is. At least it hasn't been made public who the father is. Mark was convinced that he was the father. Sabrina was saying that he wasn't. And Mark could have been the father, but Sam could also have been the father as well. Like, we just don't know. But Mark was convinced that this was his child, and he tried his hardest to try and get a paternity test. Mark was also still paying for Sabrina. He was still paying for her rent, for her lifestyle, because he thought that that was the right thing to do. He thought that she was the mother of his child and he wanted to continue financially supporting her. Over a period of 5 months, Mark paid Sabrina £12,800 for rent, and still she was refusing a paternity test. So after the 5 months, Mark cut her off. He cut her off financially. He just thought that there was absolutely nothing he could do. I think at this point as well, he had kind of thought that, well, maybe the child isn't his, because why is she refusing a paternity test if it was his? And I don't know who the father is, okay? We need to remember, I don't know who the father is, but I don't think that Mark is the father of that child, because the way Sabrina is, she wants Mark's money. She wants his financial support so she can continue to live this celebrity-like lifestyle. And if the child was Mark's, surely she would just get a paternity test, prove that it is Mark's, and then Mark would continue to financially support her. So I personally don't think that the child was Mark's. But when Mark cut Sabrina off financially, this is where things get messy, because Sabrina wasn't happy. She still wanted that money. Like I said, she was furious. She felt like she was entitled to this money. And Sabrina decided that she wanted revenge. And this is the beginning of Sabrina's deadly campaign to essentially ruin Mark's reputation. So first, Sabrina started to file several police reports claiming that Mark was violent towards her. I know, she has the audacity to accuse him of being violent when she was the violent one. She also said that Mark had left her 60 threatening voice messages. Are you sure it wasn't the other way around? The police did investigate, of course they did. These accusations are obviously serious, but they didn't find anything. Of course they didn't, because it didn't happen. So because that didn't work, Sabrina decided to take the next step in her plan, and she started calling up Mark's clients, who are international pop stars. They are huge stars. And she started calling any client that she could and telling them that Mark was a paedophile. And Mark obviously was not a paedophile. I feel like I do need to stress that. You can't throw around things like that are not true. Like, if there is one thing guaranteed to ruin your reputation, it's being accused of a paedophile, because no one wants to associate with a paedophile. And I don't actually know how he dealt with that. I'm not sure if any of his clients believed her, but that would do damage to anyone. But the accusations did not stop there. So Sabrina started to accuse Mark of sexually assaulting her cat. But she didn't have a cat. But that didn't stop her from spreading this horrific accusation, which again, of course, was not true. She even started setting up multiple Facebook accounts to also accuse him of being a paedophile, being abusive, sexually abusive, etc. So she could continue spreading the lies about Mark, and it would seem to the public that multiple people were making these accusations. She continued to file numerous police reports saying that Mark was spying on her, stalking her, hacking into her emails. Apparently, one time as well, she reported him for sending a helicopter over her home to spy on her. In total, she filed 30 police reports. In the end, the police did investigate all of these. In the end, the police had to give her a caution because she was wasting police time. So after this, Sabrina did back off her smear campaign for a little bit, and she was still with Sam, by the way. Now, Sabrina still wanted to be a celebrity, she still wanted to look like a celebrity, and she still wanted to try and be a celebrity fashion designer. But obviously, trying to act and look like a celebrity costs money, which she didn't have. So obviously the debt was piling up, and Sam was just working so hard to make ends meet. They didn't have a lot of money at all, but Sabrina was just spend. They were also described by the neighbors as neighbors from hell. They would leave rubbish, actual rubbish, just sat outside of their house for days. They would park their car anywhere. They would block their neighbors' driveways. They didn't pay their rent on time, and when their landlord came round to collect money, they threatened him with a crowbar. They were also extremely antisocial. They were rude. No one really liked them. But somehow Sabrina actually did manage to lead this wannabe celebrity lifestyle. She ended up attending Paris Fashion Week 2014. Don't know how she did that, because she got like special tickets. She was backstage and everything, and she took photos with all of the right people. She was probably bumping into a few people that she had already met through Mark, and she was determined to keep her reputation as a celebrity fashion designer. And Sabrina decided to carry on the celebrity lifestyle. She needed to go out, she needed to party, she needed to socialize, and therefore she couldn't look after her children. So she decided to hire a nanny, which they couldn't afford. Like I said, debts were piling up. So they put up an advert for a nanny, and this is when a young French woman, Sophie Leone, responded. And unfortunately, this is where the tragic events of today's case take place. Sophie Leone was born on the 7th of January 1996. As a child, she was described as beautiful with a kind smile, and also that she was an incredibly selfless and generous person. Something that she had always loved were children and animals. She was passionate about children and animals and the welfare of children and animals as well. She hated to see anyone being abused. Sophie went on to study for a course in childcare, and now aged 20, she has an opportunity to become an au pair for a family in London. Sophie was a very shy, very reserved person, so the idea of going to a foreign country definitely scared her, especially as well, she couldn't really speak much English, so again, that was something else that really scared her. But Sophie saw it as an adventure. She saw it as an opportunity. So in January of 2016, Sophie decided to go for it. She decided to take this job of being an au pair for this family in London. So she packed up her bags and left France and headed for the UK. And obviously the family that she was working for were Sabrina and Sam, and now the 2 children. And unfortunately, Sophie didn't have a clue what she was getting herself into. So Sophie moves in, and at first everything is going great. Sabrina had a passion for hair and makeup, and she would often give Sophie makeovers, she would do her hair, and it was all great. That is the point of an au pair. It's somebody that lives with the family but becomes a part of the family. And in the beginning, Sophie was a part of their family. She was exploring London, she was having so much fun, she was improving her English every single day, and she adored the two children that she was looking after. And Sophie was a huge help to the family because an au pair looks after the children, but they also do like odd chores around the house. So Sophie was doing some of the cooking, some of the cleaning. She was doing a hell of a lot, but she did it willingly because she loved it so much. And Sabrina and Sam thought, great, we basically don't have to do anything anymore. But unfortunately, because Sabrina is a terrible person and Sam, to be honest, is not that much better, decided to take advantage of Sophie's kind-hearted, generous nature. As the months went by, they were demanding more and more from Sophie. Now, Sophie looks after the children and does the odd chore. She's not supposed to do everything, but they wanted her to do everything. And because Sophie was so kind, so generous, she agreed. And in the end, Sophie was pretty much doing everything for that family. She was waiting on everyone hand and foot. It got to the point where Sophie was working 80 plus hours for the family, and she was only being paid £50 a week. Let that sink in. £50 a week. That is absolutely disgusting. And when I was doing my research for this case, I found out that au pairs don't have a minimum wage in the UK, because in the UK we have minimum wage, but au pairs fall into a little bit of a loophole because the person that has employed the au pair pays for the roof over the head, bills and meals, so they don't have to pay them a minimum wage. So remember that Sabrina and Sam don't have any money basically. They can afford £50 a week though. I just want to point that out. So their debts are piling and they're saying to Sophie, oh, we can't pay you this week. We don't have enough money. Sorry. And they started missing payments. And this started to become more and more regular until eventually they just stopped paying her altogether. They just kept coming up with stupid excuses of why they couldn't pay her. And Sophie was very shy. She was very reserved. And I mean, come on, look at what Sabrina is like as a person. She's not exactly someone that you could go up and talk to, is she? And Sophie just felt really uncomfortable, and she was put in a position where she felt like she couldn't ask for her wages. But what is so absolutely disgusting is that Sabrina would say to Sophie that she should be grateful that they have put a roof over her head, they pay for her bills and meals, and she should be grateful and not complain. But then the food stopped. They slowly stopped feeding Sophie, and because they were not paying her, Sophie didn't have any money to feed herself. She was barely eating. She was losing a serious amount of weight, and it was so much weight. She was becoming physically ill. And you may be asking, so why didn't she leave? Like, why didn't she just walk out of the door? But you've got to realize how vulnerable Sophie is right now. She was very shy. She was very reserved. Sabrina made her feel incredibly uncomfortable. She's also in a foreign country and she could speak a little bit of English, but not much. This was her first proper job. She is away from home. She is away from her support system. And I also think it's very important here to mention that both Sabrina and Sam were fluent in French. They obviously both lived in France for a very long time, so they could speak to Sophie in French. So they probably made Sophie feel like they were the only ones that she could talk to in her native language, which is just incredibly manipulative. And also, this was happening very slowly over several months. This didn't happen overnight. This was gradual. Sabrina was slowly wearing Sophie down over months. She was slowly warping Sophie's reality. She was gaslighting her pretty much every single day. And Sabrina is also a very gifted manipulator. liar. She seems to have this ability to manipulate people into doing whatever she wants them to do. And Sophie was also probably incredibly scared of her. Sophie did used to talk to her mom on the phone. Her mom was back in France, but she never talked to her mom about the abuse. She kept it secret. All she would say is that she missed her mom and she wanted to come home. But if it's even possible, things now get worse from here. So remember that Sabrina wants to destroy Mark Walton. Oh yeah, she still wants to do that. Well, now, unfortunately, she drags Sophie into this disgusting game of hers. So this all started because Sabrina became convinced that Sophie had started a relationship with Mark behind Sabrina's back. Now, like most things out of Sabrina's mouth, this was all complete BS. Sophie had never even met Mark. She didn't know who he was. But this didn't matter to Sabrina. She was completely paranoid, her delusions were getting out of control, and she confronted Sophie about her paranoia, and she was shouting at Sophie, "Tell me you're seeing Mark, I know you're sleeping with it, tell me, admit it." And Sophie, like I said, didn't have a clue who Mark was, so she was saying, "I don't know who Mark is, I am not sleeping with him," like none of that. Sabrina thought that Sophie was lying. And I suppose at this point I should probably make it clear that I don't know if Sabrina truly did believe that Sophie was seeing Mark and sleeping with him, or she was just saying these things to get a confession out of Sophie to use that against Mark. I don't actually know what the truth is, but either way, to be honest, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because the accusations get even more extreme. Next, Sabrina became convinced that Sophie wasn't even an au pair. She believed that Sophie had been planted in the house by Mark to spy on the family. Sabrina said that Sophie was colluding with Mark to allow Mark to harm her family and to let Mark in the house to sexually abuse her children. Which, of course, again, like everything in this case, it wasn't true. Sophie continued to deny this, but the accusations continued and they got more and more extreme and even more bizarre. And it got to a point, because this was going on for months, that Sophie realized that she needed to get the hell out of there. Sophie called up her mom. She actually told her mom that she was unhappy. Unfortunately, she didn't tell her mom about the abuse or about the accusations, but she told her mom that she was unhappy, and her mom was like, "Okay, you need to come home, like come home right now." And Sophie's mom paid for a plane ticket for Sophie so she could come home. But tragically, Sophie would never make it on that flight. So it's August 2017 and Sabrina is still 100% determined to destroy Mark's reputation. So the next thing that she does is she drags Sophie down to a local police station. She puts Sophie in front of police officers and tells Sophie, confess what you know. Tell these police officers that Mark is trying to shoot my family. And the police officers were like, okay. They did take Sophie into an interview room because obviously they have to take everything seriously, don't they? And they say to Sophie, like, is this true? Like, what is going on? And because it's not true, and because Sophie doesn't have a clue who Mark is, that is what she tells the police officers. So the police officers were like, okay then, we'll let you go. And they didn't investigate any further, which honestly is just incredibly frustrating, because Sophie at this point was barely being fed. She was so frail. She had lost so much weight. You can visibly see that something is going on. Something is not right here. You can visibly see that in Sophie. The police officers also interacted with Sabrina, and we all know what her personality was like. The police officers should have put two and two together and thought, something doesn't seem right here. Maybe we should look into this a little bit further. But they didn't, and Sophie returned home to Sabrina's home. And it's just so frustrating, because if they had done just a little bit more digging, maybe they could have prevented what happens, because now everything goes into overdrive. So now we get to September of 2017 and Sabrina is convinced that she must make Sophie confess to all of these allegations in order to destroy Mark. Getting Sophie to confess is the only way to do this. So Sabrina comes to the conclusion that there is only one way for her to do this, and that she must force a confession out of Sophie. And I've got to warn you, this is where things really start to escalate here, and from this moment on, everything that I'm going to say is not easy to hear. So first of all, Sabrina and Sam basically decided to take Sophie hostage. And I should stress here, even though we have been focusing on Sabrina, Sam has been complicit in all of this. Sabrina is definitely the instigator, the ringleader, but Sam is not innocent. So they both decide that the only option is to take Sophie hostage. So they decide to take her passport off her. They also take away the plane ticket that Sophie's mom had bought her. So she has no escape. She has no passport. She has no plane ticket. She basically has zero money. She doesn't really know anyone in the local area. She is completely isolated and alone at this point. So Sam and Sabrina force Sophie into a very small, dark room where she is held for the next 12 days whilst she is being brutally interrogated. Sabrina was determined to get a confession out of Sophie, and Sabrina knew that she needed evidence of Sophie's wrongdoing. It's all very confusing and unbelievable, isn't it, that Sabrina actually thinks that Sophie has done something wrong. So Sabrina realizes, well, if Sophie confesses, I need evidence of this. So unbelievably, Sabrina records all of these interrogations. You can actually read the transcripts of these interrogations online. And of course, I read the transcripts for all of the interrogations, and they are so distressing to read. Most of the time, it's just Sabrina talking. Sam and Sophie don't really get a word in most of the time. And Sabrina is just accusing Sophie over and over again of the most ridiculous things. She's accusing her of being in a relationship with Mark, of sleeping with Mark, of colluding with Mark to harm her family. She's also accusing Sophie of taking drugs. I think she mentioned heroin at one point, that Sophie was hiding drugs in the house. It was very confusing, and she was basically accusing Sophie of everything under the sun. I think Sabrina was just hoping that Sophie would confess to something, so she had something on her. But obviously Sophie was completely innocent. She never did anything wrong. In the recordings, you can tell that Sabrina is the dominant one. And what I found just interesting is when I was reading the transcripts, it said the date at the top of each recording, and it said the time at the top of each recording. In the beginning of the recordings, Sam basically says nothing. He may say the odd thing here and there, but as time goes on, over those 12 days, Sam is participating more and more in those interrogations. It's almost like you can see Sam building in confidence, and you can see Sam slowly buying more and more into Sabrina's delusions. I'll just read out a few of the things from the transcripts. Obviously, I can't read every single one because there was 18 individual recordings, and a lot of it was just very repetitive, very the same. So Sabrina said to Sophie, quote, "You fancy him. He is charming. How many times did he come here at night? Whenever you come back to the house, I smell sex. Go on, how many times did he come? Go on, Sophie, go on, quickly. I hate lies. You know very well that all of my friends are in high places. I told you about my friends. You have seen them, actors, producers, in makeup, in fashion, in music." And what is just really heartbreaking is that through all of these transcripts, Sophie barely says anything. And a lot of the time in the transcripts as well, it says whispers inaudibly. Like Sophie whispers inaudibly. Like she is so weak and frail, she can barely get words out. Sabrina also threatens Sophie with prison if she doesn't confess. She says, "Close your eyes for 1 minute and imagine yourself every day in a cage like an animal." It's like, how is she threatening Sophie with prison when Sophie hasn't done anything wrong? The whole time Sophie was pleading her innocence. The whole time she was saying, "I don't know, Mark. I don't know what you're talking about." Sabrina and Sam were threatening Sophie with violence, with prison, and they were even threatening her with rape. But it wasn't just these interrogations that Sophie had to endure. Because Sophie was refusing to confess because she was innocent, she was also subjected to extreme violence. All food was completely taken away from her. She was not given a single piece of food. So Sam and Sabrina starved her. They did this so she didn't have enough energy to fight back. She was whipped repeatedly with an electric cable. She was slapped, punched, beaten. Her injuries were so severe, she suffered 5 broken ribs, a broken breastbone, and a fractured jaw. And what is just so incredibly distressing, one of the worst forms of torture, is that Sam and Sabrina waterboarded Sophie. Can't believe it, can you? It's like, how can people do this to other people? It's hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? Sabrina and Sam would repeatedly force Sophie's head underwater as well as waterboarding. They would put her in the bath and literally hold her head under the water. I don't quite know how long they held her head under the water for, but it was a decent amount of time. And then they would pull her back out to get a few breaths, and then they would force her back under. And at this point, after being beaten, starved, waterboarded, a picture was taken of Sophie, which can be seen online, and that picture will break your heart. You can see how vulnerable she is in that photo. She looks so frail, she looks so broken. And then after 12 days of torture, interrogations, suffering, Sophie confessed. She gave in. She thought that confessing was her only way out. She thought that the torture, the beatings would stop if she confessed. So Sophie sat there on camera and gave a full confession for crimes, for things that she didn't do. Sabrina had finally got what she wanted, and Sophie, like I said, was really hoping that this would signal the end of the torture. But unfortunately, that would not be the case, because after Sophie confessed, Sam and Sabrina decided to murder her. The cause of death was never actually determined. Her body was in such a bad condition when she was found, which we're obviously going to get into, but it is thought that Sam and Sabrina drowned Sophie in the bathtub. Both of them showed zero remorse, and disturbingly, after they had murdered Sophie, Sabrina and Sam had sex not too far away from Sophie's body. And they had sex to celebrate what they had done. And to do that takes a special kind of person, doesn't it? And that is why I say that Sam was just as guilty. He was just as complicit in all of this. He may have started out in this story as a victim of Sabrina, but he is definitely not a victim now. Then they decided that they needed to get rid of Sophie's body. They needed to dispose of it. And they thought that the best way to do this was to burn her body. But thankfully, this decision was actually their downfall. There's actually footage, I think, or is it a photo? I can't remember, of Sam in a local shop buying stuff for a bonfire, which is honestly just truly disturbing. So when they start to burn Sophie's body, they realize that it's gonna smell. And this next part, I honestly can't believe it. Like, when I read it, I was like, really? To cover up the smell of a burning body, Sam and Sabrina decided to barbecue chicken. There's actually a photo of their chicken on a barbecue, and the plan failed. Of course it did. The neighbors could smell a terrible smell. And also the bonfire that they were burning Sophie's body, the fire was getting out of hand, so people called the fire department. So on the 20th of September 2017, firefighters arrived at Sam and Sabrina's home. They arrived to a fire raging out of control and a foul smell. The firefighters asked, what the hell is going on? And also, what is that smell? To which Sam replied, oh, I'm just burning a sheep carcass. Really? Really? I mean, why would one be burning a sheep carcass in their back garden anyway? But why would you think that that story would work? Well, it didn't, because when the fire was eventually put out, the firefighters were searching the bonfire, and unfortunately they found a pair of glasses, a human nose, and human fingers. So the police were immediately called, and both Sam and Sabrina were arrested. So the case went to trial because both Sabrina and Sam pleaded not guilty even though there was so much evidence against them, because the police had obviously found the remains of Sophie. They also found the interrogation footage that Sabrina had taken. And at the trial, it was discovered that Sabrina was suffering from depression and borderline personality disorder. The judge also acknowledged that both of them were severely delusional. But the judge said that there was no defense to their actions. Their crimes were just so bad. They both knew what they were doing, and they both knew what they were doing was absolutely horrific and wrong. They were both found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years. And during the trial, I just want to point out as well that Sabrina and Sam both turned on each other. They both blamed each other for the crimes, and neither one of them took any responsibility for themselves, which doesn't surprise me when you come to Sabrina and her personality. But I was surprised that Sam blamed Sabrina, because we all know how obsessed Sam was with Sabrina. So I was surprised at that, but at the end of the day, he's a terrible person as well, so I shouldn't really be surprised at anything. And this case as well, it happened in 2017, which is not that long ago. I was shocked that I hadn't heard of this case before, because it wasn't that long ago. I feel like this should have been on the news. I feel like I should have known about this. This is a case that is so disturbing. What they put Sophie through for months. For months, they were torturing Sophie. The extreme torture was over 12 days, but they were starving Sophie for months. They had taken away her dignity, her identity. Mark Walton was also called to testify in the trial, because obviously this whole thing, like, it's not his fault obviously, but it was all about him. And Mark took this whole thing really hard because he blamed himself. Sophie's murder had come from a direct result of Sabrina's obsession with Mark. And obviously that is not Mark's fault, but he still, to this day, feels incredibly guilty about this.
I mean, what they were doing,
Correct.
they were torturing this poor girl. They were waterboarding her, they were starving her, they got her completely in their grip. And the excuse they used was that she, as Charlotte says, was having a secret relationship with you. You'd never met her, you'd never heard of her, and that she was spying on them for you. You said that actually you carry this with you.
Hardest thing for me going to bed at night was knowing that that girl was telling the truth every time that she was answering those questions and them interrogations. Even before I started this interview, I got a lump in my throat. It's just that picture that's on the screen now. It's very hard to look at. They're in my prayers every night. I don't know what I can say, to be honest. It's just what they've gone through is so much worse than what I've gone through, and they're just in my prayers, and I think about them all the time, that's the truth.
Mark never knew Sophie. He'd never met her in his life. The first time Mark even knew about Sophie was when he was phoned by police to be told that Sophie had been murdered by his ex. Mark actually carries a picture of Sophie in his wallet with him every day because of this. Mark also struggles to sleep now because of this case, because of Sophie, and Sophie is always in his thoughts and prayers, and so is Sophie's family. And this case is just truly heartbreaking. Sophie was only 21 years old when she was murdered. She was so kind, so selfless, so generous. All she wanted to do in life was care for others, especially children. And she took a job which was her dream job. She was looking after children. She moved to the UK full of hope. She was excited about this new journey that she was about to take. And Sabrina and Sam took that away. They took her life away from her. On the 6th of June 2018, a memorial service was held for Sophie at a cathedral in her local town. Over 150 people attended. Sophie's father made the following tribute. Sophie was so nurturing. She loved children. She loved animals. She could not stand seeing others suffering. And it breaks my heart to know that she was abused at the end of her life. And there truly are just some cases where you hope that the perpetrators never get released from prison. And this is one of those cases for me, because Sophie was so innocent, so young, so vulnerable. She was in a foreign country, and for that, they deserve never to be released. And that is the end of today's case, which is truly, truly heartbreaking. As always, let me know your thoughts, theories, and opinions. Don't forget to leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Don't forget to check out the Criminal Makeup Podcast on anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I would really, really appreciate it. And I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.